Welcome to Podcast 83, a regular look at the news, stories, and trends related to Michigan's 83 counties from the Michigan Association of Counties.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Podcast 83, the podcast put on by the Michigan Association of Counties. Today we have our normal cast and crew of MAC staff here, legislative staff. And today our focus is going to be on the Growing Michigan Together Council report, which was just released. This was a task force put together by the governor back in May, I believe. Is that right?
I think it was June, but yeah.
June, somewhere in there, May, June. And the intent was fairly simple, as to how do we grow Michigan's population? We're ranked 49 out of 50 as far as population growth goes. And the intent is how do we reverse that? So today, Deena, Sam, and Madeline, we're going to talk a little bit about a reaction to the report. It's about an 88-page report. I'm sure if you Google Growing Michigan Together Council, you'll find it. We're 4 subcommittees about that were put together. Then they reported to a main task force. And then what happens now? So let's talk a little bit about that. We always hear about task force. We've been involved with task force going back 10 years. I can think of task force that Deena, you've sat on, I've sat on. What does that mean?
Well, not much. No, it does. I mean, it highlights the need for focusing policy in specific areas. And yeah, we've seen quite a few of them over the ages. I mean, you remember the Unfunded Mandates Commission report?
Mm-hmm.
But that was a long time ago. We've seen Child Court Funding Commission report. We've seen all kinds of research papers. We've seen reports on juvenile justice. We've seen reports on road funding and what are we going to do to tackle the lack of road funding that we have out there. But the vast majority of them, we don't get a whole lot of action items in them. And if we do, it's been a real challenge to get the legislature to act on a lot of those recommendations.
Right. So it's not necessarily a mandate that these task force, anything happens with, right? It's up to task force members, legislators to pick something up, maybe that's an action item from the task force and act on it. Even some of if you look at the recommendations in here, they're kind of broad.
Vague?
Yeah. I mean,
Well, okay. So we were talking yesterday, Madeline and I were talking yesterday, and that's billions of dollars in here. In order to really implement all of these recommendations that they have in there, even though there aren't actionable items, it would cost a significant amount of money to put forth even a quarter of the recommendations in here. And, we were just talking last week about how we think the state budget is going to look fairly abysmal in the next, fiscal year 25. So I don't know where it's all going to come from. And the report doesn't really say raise revenue here to spend money there. There's no real dollars attached to it.
So where does the report go? Let's talk a little bit about where the report goes. What does it say we need to do as a state to improve our population? Sam, Madeline, give me one of them.
There's a wide variety of things from, how do we address labor shortages? Why aren't people in the workforce? What do we do about educating people, improving infrastructure? To touch on a few, one of the main reasons that we have such a short labor force is lack of access to childcare. I know as mentioned, there's not typically a lot of action items in these reports when we get them from task forces. So yes, right, we have a labor force shortage. We're short on childcare workers and places to send our kids so people can go to work. How do we address that? How do we attract people to come here or stay here, get graduate degrees or bachelor's degrees and enter, into childcare services? What do we do to reduce these barriers?
But they can say.
Right. It talks about, hey, this needs to be done, but doesn't give ways to do it, right? Or you have to really dig down into like the sub work group recommendations to kind of get there. Maybe I didn't go that far down, to be honest with you. I didn't read all the subgroup recommendations, but it so talks about childcare, workforce, education, right? Improving our education system. But does it say how to do that? Does it require increased funding? Does it recommend that? I don't, you know.
I mean, yeah, just about everything requires increased funding to fix these problems. So, I mean, from the education front, well, let's offer 2 years of free college education, which is, a wonderful idea and incentive. But I think, well, not I think, according to this report, one of the biggest problems we face is Michigan has a net loss of college graduates. So every year we have people graduating from the top universities in the world, and then they leave and go move to other states. Some come back, most don't. So yes, we want to attract people to move here and go to college here. We already have, I mean, Michigan and Michigan State have incredibly high rates of out-of-state and international students. They just don't stay. And there's not a whole lot of answers as to how do we make sure they stay here? Is it attracting, more businesses? And if the workforce isn't here, how do we incentivize the businesses to come if employees aren't here? So it's a vicious cycle. And yeah, I mean, it really goes in depth on what the issues are, but I don't know how hard it hits on what do we do about it other than throw money at the problem.
Well, okay, let's be fair, because I don't want to paint this report as something really negative, because I think it's great to put all of this information in one spot. Yes, we have great natural resources. We have amazing universities. We have, beautiful towns. Our our state is a really great place to live. And they talk about highlighting, all of the wonderful benefits about it. But I think the major theme throughout all of it is that we've stopped investing in our state. So we've stopped investing in innovative education. We've stopped investing in our infrastructure. We're not doing anywhere near enough to provide, a creative incubator, business startup, innovative climate for, people to start businesses and really make a lot of money here. I think that's really what it's highlighting. But the whole lack of investment thing, I mean, if you look at it, the report says we're 25% below the revenue we were collecting in our state general fund from 2000. I mean, how are we going to fund all of our infrastructure if we're not collecting that much revenue? Now, if you look at the makeup of the people who are on the Growing Michigan Council, the groups, I understand why they didn't say we need to raise taxes to pay for this, flat out say it. But that really is sort of the underlying theme, that we're not collecting the revenue that we had before, and we're not investing in our state the way that we could have. We've been neglectful.
So when you look at some of these subcommittees, you have job talent people, pre-12 education, you have infrastructure places and higher ed. We talked a little bit about both the education components, a little bit about job talents and people, touched briefly on infrastructure, but not really much on places. That's kind of counties, right? We think of places. We didn't have representation on sub-work group or main council. What did they talk about as far as improving where people live? Anyone can answer.
Can't hear you, Madeline.
Sorry, one of the excellent recommendations of that infrastructure and places work group was to create a revenue sharing trust fund to enable our local units of government, to make some improvements in their communities.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah.
It's been one of our priorities for a long time. I think, some of the other things they talked about as far as communities go was, you got to have a better public transit system, like a regional transit system. So connect the suburbs to the downtowns so that not everybody's driving a car, trying to figure out where to park. You know what I mean? Like, the younger generation, it's terrible. I'm getting old, I know, but I can't tell you how many kids I know that waited until they were 18, 19, 20 years old to even get a driver's license. You're not going to move them around without a good, public transportation system. And we really lack in investment in that public transportation system. they talked about, good neighborhoods and, ra- trails and walkways and recreational opportunities to make it attractive for people to be here. Um, but if you're not making money, if you're not, you don't have a job that's gonna pay you, if you don't have the education level to get the job that's gonna pay you, I don't know how many trails is gonna make that much of a difference. So it's kind of a all-encompassing problem. Gotta create a bigger, better picture.
Yeah, so, what do we suspect? I mean, we're speculating, I know, but what do we suspect that's next that comes out of this? Have we heard anything about anyone picking up anything on this? I mean, I think before the report was finalized, we definitely heard some ways to raise revenue, but those never made it into the final report. So I don't know if people got gun shy or what the case may be as far as really pulling the trigger on some funding options. But what do we think? I mean, you're going into an election year. This is probably not a 1 year fix, right? I mean, other task force that we've been on, we're still working on trial court funding changes from that task force, and that's had bills introduced numerous times. So what do we think on this one?
I think it's gonna be a while. I think it, like you said, it's an election year, so raising revenue in an election year is gonna be a very difficult vote. Now, I mean, if they start working on comprehensive strategies to, implement some of these recommendations and they run them during lame duck, maybe. But I wouldn't expect anything real substantive before then. I think they're gonna be struggling with a tight budget, and figuring out ways to really invest is gonna be a challenge when they're gonna struggle paying for what they already have right now.
Well, and a lot of these recommendations are very nuanced. Like as far as transportation goes, they acknowledged that we have a lack of road funding. The deficit's going to get bigger as electric vehicles grow in popularity. And they acknowledge that we need to transition away from our reliance on the motor fuel tax. That one recommendation is, I mean, going to take years of policy and appropriations to navigate. So I think it's a huge undertaking.
Yeah, that was going to be my point. I didn't see any low hanging fruit in here. Sometimes you try to pick off the easy ones. Let's get those done, get some momentum going. Then maybe you can go after some of these bigger ticket items, these bigger issues. But man, a lot of the stuff that I read seemed to be big changes that require a heavy lift. So it's tough to do those big lifts without some momentum going in the right direction. So
I don't know. I guess, yeah, I'm always gonna be a little bit of an optimist, but I'm gonna say that if you look at some of these recommendations or even just the description of the problem, and the description of the problem is, oh, we don't have really good regional transit, or oh, we really need better childcare, more affordable childcare, or we need to restructure the classroom in a better way. We need to give teachers some flexibility to do that, or reduced cost or free 2 years of community college or job training, those types of things. I think that those of us who work in government and in the public policy arena have some ideas on that. I think just highlighting what those needs are, maybe we can come up with some solutions if we put our heads together. Maybe our committee members, when we talk about this internally in our MAC committees, may have some ideas on how to fix some of these problems, or at least I'm hoping they do.
and who knows, maybe that was part of the intent of this task force was to start the conversation in other areas where maybe it hasn't happened, because we haven't talked about it internally much. We haven't talked about it a lot of times in our committees or at the board level. So maybe it is a great way to start that conversation for us internally and in our committees about how maybe we see these ways, and we can, kind of bring those ideas to the table should momentum start to build in some of these other areas. Good point there, Deena. Well, anything else, anyone? All right. Well, it was a kind of a quick podcast, but it is a holiday week. We're moving into Christmas and New Year's, and there's other holidays going on right now. So wish everyone a happy holidays, happy New Year as we move through here, and look forward to seeing everyone in 2024. Thanks, guys.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of Podcast 83.